Good afternoon. Welcome to our show. I'm your host, Melissa Ridgen. We're all acutely aware of what's happening in Nova Scotia as Mi'kmaq attempt to exercise their right to fish lobster to make a living. They're confronted with violence and hatreds, possibly stemming from the lack of understanding of treaty rights or respect for those rights. But what's happening on the East Coast right now is far from the only attack on those with rights to harvest traditional foods. Today, once again, we are putting harvesting rights in focus. And we're going to tell you what's happening with moose hunting in Manitoba and how Métis and First Nation hunters have found themselves in the sights of the provincial regulations, the age-old battle between provincial jurisdiction and no bearing on treaty rights. And we go to British Columbia, where a staple traditional food is in jeopardy, that's salmon, and all of the reasons why. It's, of course, a call-in show. You can call us toll-free to share your stories with problems when you've been exercising your right to hunt or fish. Our phone lines are open. You can call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Tweet us at APTN InFocus, or you can comment on APTN News Facebook page where this is being live streamed. And later in the show, we are totally switching gears. The Other Side is a popular paranormal investigation show that kicks off Season 6 right here on APTN. The Other Side team is going to be doing a live investigation on Saturday, Halloween, right here at the APTN headquarters in Winnipeg, where for years staff have shared stories of seeing and hearing things and experiencing paranormal occurrences. We've got two staff members here to share with us some of what the Other Side investigators will be looking into on that live streamed event. You won't want to miss what they have to say. But let's kick things off in British Columbia with what's happening there with salmon. Colin Crozier from APTN Investigates did a documentary a couple of years ago exploring the effect of salmon farming off the coast. It's called Salmon Warriors. Let's take a look.
BC's fish farming industry has divided scientists, governments, and First Nations up and down the coast for the last 30 years.
Make no mistake, we're not going to stop until the fish farms are out.
Many believe the industry is an ecological disaster waiting to happen. A breeding ground for disease that has decimated the surrounding environment and wildlife, namely Pacific salmon. While others see the farms as an essential part of the provincial economy, one that provides steady jobs and meets a growing demand for fresh seafood. With battle lines being drawn across the province, striking a balance between economic prosperity, environmental protection, and Indigenous sovereignty has become critical.
So for those of you not on the West Coast, this all might be news to you as well, that this fight about salmon has been going on for decades, heating up in recent years with the arrival of these foreign-owned fish farms operating in the open water of the coast. More than 100 First Nations and various environmental groups have called for the government to remove fish farming from the Discovery Islands off BC's west coast. They say the Fraser salmon fishery has collapsed and the fish farms are partly to blame. Here's a look at a piece by APTN's Tina House.
Back in 2009, the Cohen Commission was created to look at the decline in salmon on the Fraser River. $25 million was spent on the inquiry, and it provided a series of recommendations. Number 19 of those recommendations was that if fish farms disrupted the Fraser River salmon in any way, they must be closed by September 30th, 2020. And with that deadline looming, everyone here says the time to act is now. Chief Wayne Sparrow of Musqueam on the Fraser River says his community hasn't been able to fish in 2 years.
It's industry that's driving it, and we have to pull together as First Nations, to use our powers that we have and the legal mechanism that we have to try to get them out. Like I said, we were a fool for a while until it got brought to our attention by my cousin Mike Sparrow that the fish farm recommendations weren't being followed. So we had a few commission meetings to talk about it, thinking that those recommendations were going to be adhered to, and then finding out. So now we're into the fight now, and we're not going to give up the fight.
If I was able to talk to Prime Minister Trudeau and Minister Jordan right now, I would ask him, who are you listening to in terms of fish farms, in terms of implementing Cohen Recommendation 19, in terms of actioning the transition of fish farms to open net cage, from open net cage to land-based closed containment.
Tina House, APTN National News, North Vancouver.
Joining us now is Bob Chamberlain. He's a grassroots longtime salmon warrior himself. He's Kwakwaka'wakw and knows the salmon issue inside and out, backwards and forwards. And Alexander Morton is a biologist who has worked closely with First Nations in their fight for healthy salmon stocks in coastal and inland BC. Thank you guys both for joining us. So, Bob, for our eastern and central or our northern viewers who may not know, give us an idea of what salmon mean to nations in BC.
When you consider salmon across British Columbia for First Nations, we're talking about one of the primary staple foods and sources of protein. We've always relied upon this resource and managed it in a very good manner up until DFO decided to step up and do what's best, which is essentially marshal the salmon runs of British Columbia down the road of extinction.
Are there parallels between what you're seeing with the Mi'kmaq on the East Coast with their fight and the fight that you guys have been having about salmon on the West Coast?
Oh, without a question. We have the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, through implementation of regulation and policy, absolutely recharacterizing Supreme Court of Canada law. And when we consider that as a democracy, that should be a red flag for all Canadians. But this is no surprise to any First Nation across Canada, where the department has steadfastly refused to embrace Supreme Court rulings in the broadest sense. And in response, they take the narrowest possible view, which puts our salmon at risk, but it also then diminishes the human rights of First Nations people in this country.
So you said the role of the GFO in all of this, they seem to just, do what they want. Is the problem really with DFO, or is it with the politicians who direct them?
I would say that both. I would say that the problem inside DFO is that the environment is one that is hell-bent on supporting of fish farms. Now, the Cohen Commission was in response to a very, very low return of sockeye salmon to the Fraser. And here we are 8 years later, where we've had two successive runs that are even lower than what triggered the Cohen Commission examination. And we still have the department perpetuating support for fish farms, creating science that supports that, and moves completely away and absolutely abandon the precautionary principle in terms of their primary responsibility to the environment and wild fisheries.
Alexander, I was shocked, and I'm not a fisheries expert by any stretch here, but I was shocked to learn in researching this that the fish that are farmed in the Pacific Ocean are in fact Atlantic salmon. You're a biologist. Can you explain why? And who would think that it was a good idea to do this? Like, it seems to me that would be introducing an invasive species, and that could have some problems.
You are absolutely right. They are an invasive species, and they have brought their own viruses with them, particularly Piscine orthoreovirus. The reason we have Atlantic salmon is all of the salmon farmers operating in the ocean in British Columbia are from outside British Columbia. Most of them are Norwegian, and they brought their livestock with them, similar to the European cow farmers brought their livestock from Europe. So the Atlantics grow fast, get fat easily in the pens, whereas Pacific salmon just didn't adapt as well to that.
I want to watch a clip here. This is another clip from Salmon Warriors, that documentary done by our friends over at APTN Investigates. Let's take a look.
What's happened here over the years is there been sick fish have been coming into our mainland and killing our regular runs. The fish farms have viruses and sea lice and all kinds of diseases that have been emptying out our rivers.
So if I'm to understand that, it's not just a matter of the fish in the fish farms in the ocean being problematic to fish in the ocean, it's actually affecting inland fish as well. Alexander, can you speak a little bit to, what is the risk that is posed to wild salmon from fish farms? And also, is that the only problem that wild salmon are facing? Is it just fish farms and whatever it is that they mean to the wild salmon stocks?
Well, to answer your second question first, they are not the only impact, but the problem is wild salmon are no longer getting to sea because as they pass these farms, which have been clustered on the migration route, they are being infected with levels of sea lice that they're just not used to. So salmon farms are feedlots, and they break all the natural laws that kept wild salmon prosperous on this coast. They hold them in one place, it's monoculture, so they're genetically similar. And the viruses and the sea lice, similar to this picture, are just exploding on these farms. And then the little wild fish go by and they are getting infected. And they just weren't designed to take this. This is happening in Norway, Scotland, Ireland, Eastern Canada, Chile, everywhere this salmon farming industry operates. And yet they've been allowed to get away with the myth that they're doing things better here. Well, they're not. 99% of the Fraser sockeye were infected at levels they won't survive last spring, and it's ongoing.
Well, we just heard, leading up to this, that there was a deadline, and that deadline has now passed. And my understanding is that the DFO has said, no, there's no risk at all. Everything is fine. Carry on as per usual. Bob, can you speak to that?
Well, the problem that I see with the announcement the DFO minister made is that he puts up 9 science papers, essentially are internally peer-reviewed, where people that are going to examine the work are handpicked to do so. And this is a less strenuous examination than I understand from an international standard of peer review. And they, of course, omitted and completely disregarded sea lice. And the rationale for that is just, it does not make any sense. Because as Alexander just mentioned, that these farms are clustered along out-migration salmon routes where the juvenile salmons are most vulnerable. And so the industry chooses that for good tidal flush for a variety of reasons. But the thing is, it brings our salmon to very close proximity to billions of larvae in the same water column, as well as the opportunity for pathogens. And so this is no surprise that the DFO has decided to avoid sea lice.
How worried are you, Bob, about the short term and the midterm and the long term impact? Well, like what are you seeing? People on the ground, people who have this traditional knowledge, what are they saying?
Well, I'm very concerned, and I want all British Columbians and Canadians to understand the urgency of action right now. We have the lowest salmon return in history to the Fraser River. And when you consider out of all the juvenile salmon that leave the rivers out to the ocean, an extremely low percent, like 2 or 3% return as adults. So now we're going to have a very low volume of juveniles leaving the Fraser after they've hatched. And then they're going to come full force to this this shooting gallery, this death of sea lice and pathogens. And so what we're going to see in 4 years from now is an even lower run. And so the time now, if we don't want to see a mass extinction of Fraser River sockeye and other fish, then we need to get these farms out of the discovery channels right now, and not some sort of a delay, deny, and distract tactic that DFO always does with consultation.
I want to take another look at a clip. This is from Ernest Alfred, who occupied one of those coastal fish farms. Oh, we don't have that clip right now, apparently. We do have a clip, though, from Ian Roberts, who was speaking on behalf of the fish farms. Let's take a look at what he has to say.
Our fish don't impact the health and populations of wild salmon. And that's just not me talking. That's not opinion. That is fact. There's been several reviews on the coast here over in the last 5, 10, 20 years that have confirmed that our salmon aren't negatively impacting wild salmon.
Interesting. Alexandra, you have called fish farms the biggest industrial spill in all of Canada. Can you explain that?
Well, we know that they are pouring out billions of larval lice and virus particles as they go by. They are super shedders. And what Ian Roberts said there is simply not true. What is interesting is the shot after Ian is a lab in DFO who is finding that these farms are having enormous impact, supporting the research that I'm doing and many others. So I just don't know if your people realize, but following the occupation, Bob Chamberlain was a lead in the negotiations that got the farms out of a major part of this coast. And so I'm now studying the impact of Bob's work to look at the juvenile fish. And last spring, it was only fish leaving his territory that looked like they were going to survive. The rest of them were just encrusted with sea lice.
Bob, last questions for you. What has to happen to save the traditional food there?
Well, we need the government to absolutely embrace the precautionary principle. And what that, for viewers that may not know what this is, in the absence of clear science, they must err on the side of caution for the environment and wild fish. And that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing the government cook up some good science that supports their internal support for this industry at the expense of the primary responsibility of looking after the wild salmon. And so we need to be able to get these farms out of the way of migration routes and to move beyond it and consider the commitments of the federal government to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. As Alexandra just mentioned, a team of us on the Broughton Archipelago implemented the UN Declaration, first time in Canadian history. And now they're coming to the Discovery Islands with a consultation model. And this has got to change. Here's an opportunity to recreate something that has demonstrated success and be able to implement a precautionary principle to look after the primary responsibilities and wild salmon for all British Columbians.
Do you think it's going to happen?
I know I've spoken to many of the leadership that's involved. They're upcoming with the consultation, and they're definitely focusing on a free, prior, and informed consent model, looking at reproducing the Broughton Archipelago. And we're going to see if DFO and the federal government actually has any measure of believability in terms of their commitment to implement the UN Declaration.
Well, I guess we now will be sitting watching what continues on the East Coast, and hopefully everybody here has learned we should also be watching what's happening over on the West Coast. Thank you guys both for being so informative and bringing us up to speed on what's going on there. I would say to everybody here watching, you should all check out the Salmon Warriors by APTN Investigates video journalist Colleen Crozier for insight on how salmon farms on the Pacific are impacting wild fish. It's an incredible documentary. You can go to aptnnews.ca/investigates and find it in there. You can also find it on YouTube. Just search Salmon Warriors. We have to take a break, but when we come back, we're heading to Manitoba right here, where the right to harvest moose has made some regional headlines of late, but has national repercussions. I want you to stay with us.
Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
Welcome back. Let's go to social media now with our social media editor, Jesse Andrushko, to hear what some of you're saying about today's topic.
Thank you, Melissa. We put a few questions online, and we are getting some interesting responses. For one of the questions, we asked, why are inherent treaty rights continually trampled in Canada? Let's take a look at some of our responses from our Instagram page. Steve said, because us settlers don't understand and or don't want to understand the treaties. From Jake, white Canadians see Indigenous people as second class to them, therefore they don't value treaties. Rebecca commented, white supremacy, institutional racism. Madeline said, lack of treaty education in our educational systems. We also got a few answers on Twitter with some different viewpoints. Rolf said, traditional harvesting in the traditional way is not at issue. Harvesting using new technology over and above opportunities afforded to other Canadians is. Jeremiah tweeted, Canada should not honor such outdated agreements that were made before it came into being, especially with people who are ungrateful and do not obey the rule of law. Lastly, from Budichia, Indigenous treaty rights should always be respected, as are the laws of the country, even more so because Indigenous people were here long before us. It's their country and we are the guests of these people. Thanks to all of our viewers who commented. There's certainly a lot of different perspectives when it comes to treaty rights. Hopefully we can keep this discussion going. If you would like to add your opinion, here's how.
Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
I guess one of those comments about if you're going to honor treaties, it has to be in that same way that people were harvesting back when the treaties were signed. And I guess my question would be then, so settlers should also start going back to that as well. I don't see anybody volunteering for that, though. So to Manitoba now, where a battle has been brewing for years, but largely isn't known outside of regional rural pockets here in the province. Like what we're seeing on the East Coast with lobster, there's one side exercising their treaty rights, their constitutional rights to harvest, and then another side saying, sorry, I'm losing my voice here, that they can't because this is all about conservation. So there's been clashes, of course, with Indigenous harvesters and rural folks. We're going to unpack all of that now with our guests. Joining me, Will Goodon from the Manitoba Métis Federation and Jerry Daniels from the Southern Chiefs Organization. Thank you guys both for being here with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got viewers across the country watching what's happening on the East Coast. Everybody seems to understand what's going on there. But outside of Manitoba, most people don't know what's happening with moose hunting here. So I'm going to ask you each to explain. So I'll start with you, Will. What's going on?
Yeah, so, you know, it was obvious that there's been some changes in what's going on with big game animals here in Manitoba, and the moose. It was noticed many years ago that some numbers were declining. You know, the numbers maybe are a little bit, you know, need to be unpacked a little bit. Some of the moose have moved as maybe not just declining, but there was some areas where the moose populations were going down. So the province at the time decided that it needed to reach out to all stakeholders, including Indigenous peoples, to say, look, we need to do something about this. And at that time, I believe it was 9 years ago, the MMF agreed that we would look at a closure in certain areas. But then a couple of years ago, the province came to us and said maybe there's you know, the numbers are starting to come up. There could be a potential for a limited harvest. I believe we got our first letter in November 2018 that the province was looking at that. But the problem is that the province wanted to make sure that their base of support, the Conservative Party wanted to make sure that their base was able to hunt at the same time as Indigenous harvesters, which we know is what the Supreme Court says is not to happen.
Yes.
The Constitution says the opposite of that, but this Premier and his ministers seem to want to do things their way or no way. So. Yeah.
Chief Daniels, I'm curious your perspective on this. How is it different for First Nations, or is it different for First Nations than it is for Métis?
Well, I don't want to talk about First Nation versus Métis rights. I think there are relatives. But what I will say is that First Nations have never given up our right to hunt and fish, and we've always been proactive in creating relationship and looking at conservation methods. And for the, you know, when you look at how First Nations have managed, you know, our relatives out on the land, is We've done it for thousands of years. And we agreed many times, many of our local chiefs in different communities, different regions throughout southern Manitoba have agreed to work with the province on a very respectful relationship way forward. And since that time, the province is trying to create confusion, trying to make us and characterize Indigenous people as being people who are over hunting, who are not respectful of our four-legged relatives, and that's just simply not the case. And when you look at the treaty rights, clearly it's a nation-to-nation relationship. We never agreed for the province to assert authority over us. And for decades and decades, chiefs, well before my time, have always opposed provincial unilateral, decision-making. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to oppose that. The Métis, our relatives in the Métis Nation, are our friends on this issue. We want to work together. And we have a mutual understanding on how to approach this. And if the province, wants to keep intimidating our people out on the land, then we're just going to simply stand with our people and look to the federal government for intervention here. We never agreed for the provinces to have jurisdiction over us, and the federal government has a judiciary responsibility, constitutional responsibility, to make it clear that First Nations have a right here. And actually, we should have rights of first refusal. We're the ones who are eating and hunting for sustenance. We're not hunting for sport. That's a big difference. And so it clearly, when you think about where the priority is, it's for those who are hunting for sustenance, those who are using it to eat. And I think that's paramount here.
I want to get to what's happening, some of what's happening on the ground. There has been some issues, but we do have a caller right now calling from Thunder Bay. Sorry, I didn't get your name. Are you there? Hey,
my name's Hillary.
Hey.
So my question is, why hasn't the federal government intervened? Like the one video of a white fisherman attacking the chief and the police standing there and doing nothing. Now, if that was an Indigenous people or an Indigenous person attacking a white person for no reason, that police officer's gun would have been already out of his holster.
I think a lot of people feel that. That's right. And Chief Daniels was just saying the exact same thing. The provinces don't have jurisdiction over this right. Where are the feds in all of this?
You're asking me.
I'll put it to Will, and I'll ask Jerry too. Where's the feds in all this? Isn't they've left this to be this is little fights between First Nations people or Métis people and DFO out on the West Coast or on the East Coast, and here they're saying, oh, it's between First Nations and Métis and the provinces.
Yeah, so that's not to get into too technical or legal, trying to explain things, but the way that the Constitution has is, set aside the jurisdiction for natural resources with the province. So the province does have the authority to exercise that the responsibility for it, but. When the province also has the responsibility to listen to what the Supreme Court has said.
Right.
The province also has a responsibility to look at what the Constitution says. There's been court decisions right across this country, but here in Manitoba, there was a case that's got my name on it. Where I shot a duck, and I was found not guilty because I was exercising my constitutional right. So, these things are pretty clear cut and dry. And then there's other Supreme Court decisions about consultation. There has been literally no consultation, even though this Premier calls his consultation the gold standard. Nobody knows. I know we were talking about this the other day with Grand Chief Daniels about the St. Martin floodway outlet, that there's been no consultation. They don't talk to Indigenous people. They might see somebody walking down the street and say hello to them, and that's their consultation. But it is so poor. It is, we've got Indigenous leaders right across the board, First Nations, Métis, saying that this province has done literally nothing. They don't talk to us. They don't listen to us. They seem to be only interested in what their base wants to hear. And if you vote for Brian Palliser, then maybe he'll help you out. But if you don't, like most Indigenous people, he's not going to be on your side. It's quite ridiculous.
Well, and the base of people who would be voting Conservative are not necessarily people who they would probably look and say we all should be treated equally. It's like that's not what that's not how it works. That's not what the rights are. And,
right.
and if you understood that, I wouldn't have to tell you.
Right.
Chief Daniels, I wanted to just go back to you quickly. What are you hearing on the ground? You had mentioned before that there's, people are getting kind of harassed by provincial wildlife, fish and game officials. What are you hearing? What's some of the stuff that's happened?
Well, I mean, it's cut and dry. I mean, what's going on is people are losing their trucks, they're losing their guns, they're being charged. We're being forced to fight through the court system, and that is really the only option we have here. And that's because, back, several decades ago, the NRTA was transferred, jurisdiction without any consultation with First Nations or really any Indigenous body around who would control the land. And we're talking about millions of acres that's still owed today. Many outstanding disputes around who owns what. But in the meantime, we're going to have to deal with this basically bullying and intimidation out on the land. And that's what we're seeing take place. And so, many of us, that's our livelihood. And we don't have a whole lot of money to go and hire the best lawyers so that we can continue to fight these things. And it's just another example of where First Nations are being, trying to suppress our rights and suppress our ability to live out our livelihood and live out our cultural way of life.
I'm curious, I know a lot of, just from the regional coverage that it's received here, it is being framed as you've got First Nations and Métis out night hunting, spotlight hunting, which is unfair to the animals. They're doing it out of season. It's cheap. It's wrong. And we care about conservation. That's where the government's gone. Chief Daniels, your thoughts on how it's been framed like that?
I think that's the difficulty here. People need to understand that First Nations are hunting for their livelihoods. They're hunting for sustenance. That is where we're focused. And in my community, I've never heard of anybody hunting for sport. No one is, we hunt, we cut up the meat, we give it to the elders. That's how it's done in our community, and that's how it's done throughout the region. People aren't becoming millionaires off. That's just not the case. People are not, going out there and shooting, 10 moose, 20 moose, or something like that. There's huge wolf populations out there. There's huge bear populations, especially on the southeast side. Those are part of the problems with what we're seeing. Habitat, there's all, but this is being managed by the province, okay? This crisis is being managed by the province, and people need to understand that. They've been in charge now since the NRTA was signed. And so you can't say that First Nations are the reason for where we are today. If it was First Nations, there'd be even less licensing, and it would be for sustenance only.
We have another caller here who wanted to talk about moose hunting.
Hello.
Hi, Sally. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. What did you have to add?
I'd like to add that I do believe that the Native culture does have the right to harvest moose, but I think that we don't have all the riches to go and drive all around with these ATVs and big fancy trucks to fetch them far away and trophy hunt or just sport hunt. So we do it for sustenance. That's absolutely true. I'm a hunter and I'm Gitxsan, and what I like to say is that all Native bands or all Native tribes or whatever you people want to call us, all of us need to figure out a way to work in conservation. Where I am, I see a lot of decline in moose, a lot of decline. Yes, there's wolves. Yes, there's trains. Yes, there's falling through ice and all this. However, I absolutely know and absolutely see that there's a lot of Native people getting the easier species, which of the moose is the females. The bulls are smarter. They run off and they're harder to get. So it's easy to get a female moose. I don't know why God made them just stand around and have a good look at you, especially if there's twins. And all of a sudden you get people and they're like, yay, we shot a few of them. One couple years back, these people shot 3.
Did they eat them, though?
Well, I'm sure they eat them. And do they give them to elders?
Yeah.
We don't know. What do they do with that? They possibly do share it. Maybe they trade it. But there's got to be some form of conservation for us Native people to hold ourselves to that standard of, hey, man, we can't go and just kill all of those because they're the baby makers. Mm-hmm. And sure, they're putting up posters in our community saying, hey, you just killed 3 generations of moose. But I say, yes, Native people hunt for food. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, that's the truth. And we need it. We absolutely need it. Mm. But we need to figure out amongst ourselves, with the help of smarter people up, maybe the chiefs or whatever, we need them to help us figure out how to preserve our food conservation-wise.
Thanks.
That's my biggest thing. So
I appreciate that, Sally. Will, there's good points in there. Not every single individual is responsible in their harvesting, right? So what are groups like the MMF doing to make sure that it is responsible harvesting?
That's a fantastic point, and something that I wanted to touch base on anyways. As we know, with the Manitoba Métis Federation, we have our laws of the harvest. We have our harvesters who are registered. The cards identify them as harvesters, as rights holders, and then they also agree to adhere to the conservation principles upon which the laws of the harvest were first put forward on. Our elders told us that there's no point in hunting moose if there is no more moose, so that is something that we take very, very seriously. And in fact, the province's own numbers back in 2018, as I said before, and again in 2020, said that it is likely that 60 moose could be sustainably harvested in the Duck Mountains and the Porcupine Mountains. So the Manitoba Métis Federation took that advice to heart and said we are going to share with our First Nations brothers and sisters, and we will take 26 moose. So we have limited moose hunting in those areas. There are 26 tags that were given out. They were given out with groups of 4 harvesters, and they also had to agree that they would share with the community. So sharing, conservation, limited harvest, that even in the province's own numbers is more than fair, that will be sustainable for the time, for this year at the very least, and probably going forward. But then as well, you know, if there is a, and this is something that we have always taken very seriously, if a Métis harvester goes outside of the laws of the harvest that have been set aside by the Métis government, condoned and approved by Métis citizens across the province, if they go out beyond that and they get charged, they get charged. We're not going to protect them. But if they are following our laws of the harvest, we will protect them, full stop. And I want to say a big thank you to Grand Chief Daniels for his message a couple of days ago, saying that they would do this very same thing, that they will do their very best to protect First Nations harvesters. So I think that's I think that sends a clear message that conservation has always been at the very heart and soul of what the MMF has been doing in the laws of the harvest. Full stop. And this is again at the very foundation of what we're doing. We so if somebody was to go out and shoot 4 moose, hey, they get charged, and we'll support the Crown in charging against them. But this is not how things are being put together, and this is not how our harvesters are anyway. So, and if there is one bad apple, they will get charged, and we will support that. Yeah.
Chief Daniels, last question to you. I mean, we saw what happened with 2 Métis hunters in Alberta not all that long ago, out harvesting, end up murdered. 2 people have been charged in that crime. They've yet to go to trial. We've seen the violence out on the East Coast with regards to lobster harvesting, just the rage that people have when you see First Nations exercising their inherent rights, asserting those rights. Chief Daniels, what do you fear, you know, with those 2 things happening in Alberta and on the East Coast, do you have fears here in Manitoba with regards to moose hunting?
Well, I think when it comes to racism overall, there needs to be a zero tolerance policy on that. You know, we're left confronting it. There's not a lot done about it, but it needs to be absolutely erased from our society. You know, it's something that is being passed on from generation to generation, and it absolutely needs to be eliminated. We will confront it where we see it. We will do it in a proactive way. You know, it's not our intent to create any sort of divisions. You know, we've reached out across many lines to our relatives from different backgrounds in different countries. you know, and we're looking at best practices, whether we're talking about health or CFS or hunting or every area that we work in. We want to see a sustainable move towards the future.
Thanks.
You know, we're looking at circular economies, all kinds of stuff like that.
I appreciate this.
I'll have to be a part of it.
I gotta cut you off because we have to go to a break. I'm getting yelled at in my ear. Thank you guys both for joining us, talking about moose hunting here. Will Godon, Jerry Daniels. We need to take a break. Coming up, switching gears to talking about ghosts. Stay with us. Tonight here on APTN. This season, they'll be investigating occurrences here at APTN headquarters. We're going to explain that right away. Stay with us. Welcome back. This weekend on Halloween night, fans of The Other Side are in for an epic treat. The Other Side team will be investigating live on Facebook right here at APTN headquarters in downtown Winnipeg, where for years staff have reported supernatural occurrences. It's at 8 p.m. Central Time on Facebook Live. You can just go to Facebook and search The Other Side Investigates Live. You can find a link to it there where you can watch. Here is a look at The Other Side Season 6, which begins tonight.
I did feel something in that space.
Something was here.
Creator, give us strength for what we are going to do tonight.
Taking things from grave sites, I'm a little bit weary of that and what we might run into.
I would be a little disturbed if someone disturbed my grave.
Anybody else hear that?
Yeah, I did.
Yes.
I heard Anne. Did you hear that? One more time. Anne, one more time.
The story is, if you're in here alone, they say you might want to leave.
She's here.
I don't think I would want to be alone in this building.
Hello?
I heard it like a door opening. Rose.
Oh my God. The battery, it's dead. It's completely dead. I think I pissed her off.
We don't want to hurt you.
Shut the door.
We just need to know that you're here.
Step away, step away, step away, step away.
I want to keep my eyes covered and I don't understand it.
Love that show so much. For the 20 years that APTN has been in existence, staff here at the headquarters in Winnipeg have reported lots of things, occurrences that suggest maybe there are spirits here. Joining me now are two longtime APTNers who have shared their stories with The Other Side this season and are here now to share with us. Vera Houle is the Director of Community Relations, and Cheryl Chinchilla, she's Administrative Officer of Marketing, our Marketing Department. Thanks for joining us. I'm so glad that you guys could join us today to talk about what everybody here at APTN all knows. You don't have to work here very long before you start hearing the stories. I'll start with you, Vera. How long have you been here?
16 years, and 2 years before that, so in total 18 years.
Cheryl?
It'll actually be 21 years on November 1 for me.
So since the beginning?
Yeah, 99.
Jeez. So I want to ask you, what was the first thing that happened to you? How long had you been here, and what was the first experience?
Probably, well, there's always something going on. 4th floor, my department, marketing, and everybody's got stories. But the first one that really stood out for me was in our basement. We were smudging the building at that time. I believe it was the open house for the news.
For this new studio?
Yes.
Yeah.
So our elder at the time, he had to leave me and his grandson. He goes, you guys could do the rest. You go in the basement. He left to go pay for his parking. Okay, here we go, Michael. We're going around, we're in the basement. That was actually the first time I've been in the basement. So we went to the boiler area part of the basement, and there's about 3 feet in between the boiler and the wall. So we walked back there because it needed to be smudged. As we turned around, I seen it, but Michael, he was the one that said it. Did you see that? Yes, I did. I'm just getting chills right now. This thing, a shadow, it was quite a big shadow. It walked out in front of us. There was no way that we could be making the shadow ourselves because we were in the dark and there was a light there. But that was the first time, and it freaked me out, but I wasn't scared of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just continued smudging the building, and we came up here to join everybody. Yeah.
Like you said, I mean, everybody's got, from marketing on that 4th floor has stories,
yes.
right? What's your first story? Where did it happen and how long ago?
The very first one, I'd say, was in 2002, when the newsroom used to be on the other side on the main floor. This was like very early days. All of us were squished into the newsroom.
Sardines?
Yeah, we were like sardines, tightly squeezed in there, and there was a mirror or a window into the studio part, and we used to have our meetings just sitting around like this, and somebody was standing in the glass, but there was nobody in the studio. So it looked like a man with suspenders.
You could see like that clearly.
We couldn't see his face,
Wow.
but the form of the body, you could tell it was a man because you could see the suspenders. But when I said, "Who is that?" everybody looked and it was gone. And we went and looked behind the glass. We looked in the front of the glass.
But everybody saw it.
I don't know if everybody saw it. I just said somebody's in there,
Yeah.
and there shouldn't have been anybody in there. That was the very first time. So I didn't think it was anything.
Yeah.
We just couldn't figure out who got in and out so fast. And then afterwards, when I moved up to the 5th floor, by the lunchroom, there's a lot of times you work in the evenings here, and you'd hear things. You hear somebody cough, or you hear somebody walk, or you hear the door open and close. So you go wandering, investigating, and there's nobody there. And it's like, somebody's there. Just that sensation, that feeling of there's somebody there.
It's another energy.
It's a very different feeling. And about a little bit over a year ago, I had an incident in my office currently where I'm on the 5th floor, all by myself, and I heard somebody cough behind me. Now the window's behind me. I'm on the 5th floor, so I know there's nobody up there. And out of being startled, I just said, "Don't do that."
You find yourself talking to it at times. Yeah.
And just in total grandma style, it's like you start bossing them around.
Yes, and it does happen because you know when they're there, and you're just kind of like, you can't be scaring us.
Right.
Or I've been asked many a times throughout the 16 years here to do the smudge and do the blessing, because people have come to me and said, "This is happening," or "That's happening. Can you smudge?" And I will. I will go from the 6th floor across through the stairwell down to the 5th, through each floor and stairwell. In some stairwells and some floors, you can tell there's an energy. You can feel it. And there's almost like a muskier odor that sometimes comes up as well in certain areas.
I find that when we smudge, it calms
Settles
the
down.
spirit down for a while, but it's not too often that we get to smudge.
Do you guys think it's one spirit, or and another question is, how many people have you heard stories from over the 18 to 20 years?
I think everybody's got stories to tell. Like the other one on the 4th floor, this is where majority of the action takes place. It said my name, and I don't know, I couldn't tell if it was male or female. But again, there was a coworker there with me. This early in the morning is when a lot of the action takes place. I actually kind of recorded it in emails. But that one morning, this is probably about 8 years ago, and I'm sitting there doing my work early in the morning, the other staff members there, and it came and it said, "Cheryl." I looked up, Kate, that's not a voice I've ever heard before. I looked at my coworker. I said, "Did you hear that?" She goes, "Yes, I did." And then it was kind of like a shivering feeling when it said. So I did the right thing. Okay, there's an explanation for this. I got up, went into my boss's office. Nobody's there.
Yeah.
Who the heck said my name? And, we both heard it. And that's where a lot of the action happens, is in my boss's office. And it's like, okay, come on. Like, leave me alone for a while.
The Other Side is going to be here investigating this for season 6 of The Other Side. What do you want to come of this? What do you hope comes of this investigation?
I hope that whoever it is that is wandering and not happy finds their place to go and be happy. You know, it's. I can't imagine it's easy for spirit to be stuck whoever it is, wherever they are, in what realm they are. But I just hope for them to have peace and let us work in peace.
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you guys could come on and share. This will be something for everybody to watch at home right here on APTN this coming season on The Other Side.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to have people from The Other Side on our next week's InFocus, so you'll have to stay tuned for that. We're all out of time, and thanks, of course, for tuning in, and to our guests, of course, and to our crew here at APTN that makes this show happen each week. Don't forget The Other Side Season 6 premieres tonight, right here on APTN, 7:30 Eastern and Mountain. I'm Melissa Ridgen. See you next week.